Hi BookTube, welcome to a non-fiction review. Question: what do you do if a friend gifts you a book and you start to read it and you find that you're not really enjoying it? Worse, what happens if that book that they bought you, they actually selected from your Amazon wish list? Right? Whatever I may tell you about my reaction to today's book, I do agree with the author that there is an important principle which must apply in all these cases, and I'm going to read it from page 100. But what if I didn't love the book? What if I hated it? In the past few months, there had been 1 or 2 books chosen by me that I'd started and then stopped reading because it had been so clear to me that I didn't like the book and that the book wasn't going to get any better anytime soon. With books given by friends, I didn't have that out. The book was a gift, and gifts were to be read. That is the rule of friendship. The book we're reviewing today is Tolstoy and the Purple Chair, My Year of Magical Reading by Nina Sankovitch, published in 2011. And my copy, as I've shown you, was a gift from Georgie, and she selected it from my Amazon wishlist. So the rule of friendship applies. I've read it, and I'm here to tell you about it. Copies can be obtained on Amazon for reasonable prices. It still seems to be a fairly popular book, so the cheapest copy I could find online came in at about £6, just under £7, including delivery. How do I summarize the book? When Nina was 41 in 2005, she lost her older sister, Anne-Marie, to cancer. And Nina's initial coping response was to keep herself really, really busy, trying to fill up her life as if she could live the life her sister lost in addition to her own. And after 3 years, she realized this was not working. A whole different strategy was needed to help her heal, some way to slow down. And she chose reading because that was a love she'd shared with her sister. And she decided she would challenge herself to read 1 book every day for a year. That's a reading challenge. And it's more like, I would say that the challenge itself, as it is written, is more like background music in the book. The book is really a memoir of Nina's growing up, memories of her sister, of family traditions and lore. Britta Bohler describes this book as a grief memoir. And I think, yes, that is the core subject. And the book reading challenge is in the service of dealing with that loss. What we know about the author: Nina Sankovitch was born, I think, in 1963. I had to do some clever math because I couldn't find it published online. That was in Evanston, Illinois, where she was born. She went to Tufts University and then on to Harvard Law School, where she got her Doctor of Law in 1987. And this, Tolstoy and the Purple Chair, was her first published book, but she's gone on to write other works of nonfiction. Her last book in 2020 was called American Rebels: How the Hancock, Adams, and Quincy Families Fanned the Flames of the American Revolution. And I will leave a link to her website. Let's talk about the book's structure. The text presentation, the font is 12 point. It's good size font. There's a half space between each line of text, and each chapter begins with an epigraph, a little quote from the book that she's reading. So that takes up a little bit of space too. I can probably show you that on screen. There we go. There's a prologue that starts the book. It's 4 pages long. Then you have 21 chapters. They're about 10 pages each, but that's going to read quite quickly. Now, in terms of resources that come with the book, it isn't meant to be a resource-heavy book. So at the back, there's simply a list of all the books that Nina read between October 2008 and October 2009, the year of her challenge. There is a linked online resource, but I wouldn't recommend that you visit, and I won't be including a link to that in my description box because it seemed to me that the site had been hacked. Each chapter in the book centers on a theme, something that's clearly stated in the opening paragraphs. Nina then will put together a mixture of memoir with mentions of maybe 2 or 3 books that where her reading list happened to coincide with the themes that she's talking about, or the characters acted in similar ways. And then there's a tidy summary at the end of the chapter, which recaps the point made at the beginning. They're very, very highly structured little essays. What's noteworthy, I think, and Britta Bohler mentioned this, is that if you don't read nonfiction normally, if it's not your thing, but you're thinking, well, I want to start, but what would be a good first book? Well, I think this would be the kind of thing, not necessarily this book, but you could pick this one because it's not complex, it's not weighty, but at the same time, you will learn something from it. It might just be the right book also for a reader who's recently lost someone close to them. It might be good to know that reading helped someone else with their grief. Maybe it would inspire a similar reading project. But to help you make up your mind whether you're thinking this may or may not be the right book for you, I think it's good to consult the Goodreads reviews, because there were 7,219 reviews left for this book. But what is interesting is that exactly 50% of them are 4 or 5 stars, and exactly 50% are 3 stars or less. And I think that's important because it shows very divided opinions on the book, and I get why that might be. I want to talk about a few qualities in this book which could affect your enjoyment of it one way or t'other, depending upon who you are. Firstly, it is a grief memoir that just happens to be about the reading of books. I've mentioned Britta Bohler several times now. There will be a link to the video she did reviewing this book because she enjoyed it greatly. But I think she did point out that a lot of people she knew didn't enjoy the book. And the reason they didn't was they came to the book with a completely different expectation of what they were going to get. And she said maybe some people were expecting greater bookish content. There isn't really chapter by chapter much about the books that were read. And I must admit that I came hoping for that. That's the kind of content I want. I didn't need a grief memoir. So yeah, if you are thinking, oh, this is about somebody who has a whole year reading project, wouldn't it be cool to know how they did it and some of the mechanics? You will get a little bit of that, but it'll be so little, I don't think it will compensate for the amount of pages that where really you'll be reading about Nina and her family and how they reacted to the death of her sister Anne-Marie. Secondly, I think the author's privileged socioeconomic status may make it difficult for some readers to find her grief story one that really works for them. Nina studied law at Harvard, and then she managed, to go for a year without making any income, contributing any income herself to a household that had 4 children. So now what level of wealth she must be at. And for a lot of readers, they're just never going to understand that lifestyle. And I'm one of them. I struggled at many points with this book. In fact, there was one passage in particular where I almost thought, is this a book I can keep on reading? And it's on page 135, and I'll read it to you now. I often find myself at dinner parties arguing over the altruism of human beings. One dinner stands out in my memory, a meal of lobster alongside a pool in East Hampton on a warm summer evening. At a table of 8, I found myself the only one willing to believe that humans are inherently cooperative and productive. I looked around the table at my dinner mates, all products of loving families, solid public educations, and open career opportunities. How could they not grasp that it was the goodness of humanity upon which all their bounty was based? I laid claim to the fine meal, long-held friendships, and burgeoning families as proof of the big and small feats of goodness and selflessness that humans are capable of. And all I could think of as I read that passage was, wow, I've never heard the Protestant gospel of wealth worded in quite that way. But that's immediately what I heard, was the God has blessed me, and I know that I'm righteous because look at all the stuff I have. Look how well I'm doing. So I must be a wonderful, selfless, godly person. That's what was the words that started running in my brain alongside me reading those words on the page. And I nearly gave up on the book at that point. At that sort of audacious naivete that is citing material wealth and opportunities as evidence of some inherent goodness in the people themselves. I thought, wow, okay. I really couldn't believe the author took that seriously. But okay, what redeemed the book and kept me reading were the stories that Nina told about her parents, and particularly what her father, who grew up in Poland, and her mother, who grew up in Belgium, what they went through during the Second World War. There were accounts of suffering there that did make me sit back and go, wow, you just remember then how fortunate you are yourself if you haven't gone through that level of suffering. But that was the point. For Nina herself, I think every time she made reference to where she was socioeconomically, I just thought, I can't relate. And I imagine there are a lot of readers who won't be able to relate either. And point 3, I'm really echoing remarks that I began to see appearing over and over again as I read some of the 3-star and lower reviews on Goodreads. This sense that the author's insights about grief and loss, they're not really, I was underwhelmed. They didn't touch me the way I have felt touched by other people's accounts of loss. And I don't know, more than one Goodreads reviewer used the phrase Hallmark card to describe the prose. And that was my feeling, as if I was reading sentiments that were cut out from the inside of greeting cards, one after another. Sometimes paragraphs, they sort of read like a string of these sentiments. And I'll read you a passage just to give you a flavor, an example. I should note here before I start reading, this is from page 206 and 207, that Nina is quoting from a book, one of the books that she's reading as part of her year-long project. So some of the words are from the author that she's reading. Nevertheless, the fact that she chooses them, they obviously move her, but they didn't move me. I will now read. You can judge for yourself. My month proceeded as had previous ones. More sobering works, balanced with lighter-hearted volumes. Mysteries tempered by coming-of-age novels. Reflections on middle age or end of life, harmonizing with literature for younger readers. Gothic and noir, countering memoir and exposition. I read short stories and longer novels, personal narratives, and science fiction. I found pleasure in all of it. I basked in the final words of the prologue in Bombay Time and turned the page eagerly to fill myself up with more. A day, a silver urn of promise and hope, another chance, at reinvention, at resurrection, at reincarnation, a day, the least and most of our lives. My skin came up in goosebumps, my senses tensed and ready, in reading Baker's limpid impressions of nature in the Peregrine. As her wings swept up and back, she glided faster and then faster, with her whole body flattened and compressed. Bending over in a splendid arc, she plunged to earth. I saw fields flash up behind her. Then she was gone, beyond elms and hedges and farm buildings, and I was left with nothing but the wind blowing, the sun hidden, my neck and wrists cold and stiff, my eyes raw, and the glory gone. I had spent a year mixing up the bowl of my life's soup, making a meal, seeking a cure, and finding myself. And accompanying my meal was a steady supply of books. After all, one of the simplest pleasures I know is to sit and eat with a book beside me, devouring words as I devour food. For at least one meal a week, I allow my kids to bring a book to the table and read while we eat. A shared meal, a shared pleasure. Fourth point, which is not my criticism, but I again sought a great deal on Goodreads, was that the author was often judged negatively for neglecting her family and housework during this year of reading. And I was I was surprised that people came to that conclusion still in the 21st century. But unless Nina was not telling us the whole truth, her husband and children were very supportive of this project of hers. And she does mention having a cleaner who comes in twice a week. So, again, that's that socioeconomic status thing that we're talking about. Someone else probably would struggle with this project because it wouldn't be possible to ask your family to contribute that much help all the time. But I didn't give much weight to the criticisms otherwise. Again, there still seems to be this unfair burden of domestic work and childcare expected from women that we just won't ask of men in the same position. If Nina had had an older brother, for example, who decided to take a year out to read, I suspect that the strain of criticism that would have been aimed at him wouldn't have involved carrying his fair share of domestic work. And that, I'm afraid, is my review done. And it's become more of a sideline because I've shared my feelings and the opinions of others, but I didn't have much else to say about it. I found it such a light book that there really isn't much I was able to bring out of it and say, here's some insights about loss and what it means. And I'm so sorry about that. If you go and check out Britta Bohler's link, I think you'll find she was more positive about the book. And I can see that for another reader, this might have totally worked. But for me, I did struggle to get through it. I made it, but I didn't come away feeling I had anything that I could take along with me. And certainly not, I suppose the only point that the book made that I might try myself if I ever find that I've lost someone and I'm struggling with it is to read, and to read a lot, to give myself more time for reading. I don't know if I needed this book necessarily to help me with that. That's probably the sort of thing I might have given myself time for anyway, because reading always helps me with stressful situations. So it might have been a natural thing for me to turn to as it was. So I'm sorry that I can't give you any more on that. Please feel free to check out the Goodreads reviews and, as I say, Britta Bohler's review to get some more feedback on this, because I realize this has been a very short review. But I had to be honest and say it did not give me anything substantial, certainly not about the books involved. I learned very little about the books that she read during that year, which is unfortunate. At any rate, everyone, thanks very much for checking out this very quick review. I'm going to go on and record some tag videos now. That'll cheer me up, and I'll talk to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.